Hi, this is Camille Sams with Caliber Home Loans, your Zen lender. And I'm so happy today that we are launching a new probate series. And with me, I have Erica Carter Walden. You're on that side. And she is a real estate agent with Playa Realty. And what is unique about Erica is her background is actually as a probate attorney. So she is tremendously experienced, well-versed with being able to handle probate transactions and the importance of having a trust. So this is our introductory of this series where we will be talking about probates and trust and understanding the probate process. So with that being said, Erica, please further introduce yourself, and let's talk a little bit about probate.
So probate is my passion, as well as my job. I have been licensed to not sell, but to be a lawyer for almost 20 years now. And part of that practice included probate and trust administrations, which sometimes turn into trust litigations. But now I've transitioned into the sale of real estate, and I sell all types of properties, but my niche area is probate sales. And so my goal is to educate everyone about the probate process, and hopefully you don't have to go through the probate process because you will have a trust that's well funded and actually works for you. But that unfortunately is not the case. And thousands of people pass away every year, and thousands of probates are opened every year in LA County, and a great majority of those have real estate attached to it. And I help families sell the real estate that's attached to those probates. With my background in law, I work very well with their attorneys if they have them. I also can answer or will answer general probate questions, but if it's something specific to your matter, I always refer you back to your attorney. But today with this series, and with the series going forward, I'm going to give you an overview of what the probate process is, even beyond a little bit of the real estate, because there's a lot that comes into it before you even can hire a realtor or should hire a realtor. Right. There's a lot, people come to you, somebody passes away immediately and they're like, okay, I want to sell the house. Well, you can't. Doesn't belong to you. Right. So there's a whole lot of things that happen before you can actually even touch the real property and talk to me as a realtor.
Understood. Right. So I know that as we progress through this series, our next video is going to be talking more about the actual process. But today we just wanted to give more of a definition. And I know for myself as a 16-year veteran in the real estate and mortgage industry, this is a transaction that's always really hard for me to wrap my head around. It's a difficult one for me to understand the nuances of what avoids probate, what exactly is the process. So I have found that it really is, I know that I'm constantly asking the same question over and over and over again, because it really is one of those things that unless you specialize in it, unless you're doing it every day, unless you know it like the back of your hand, you're not going to do it. It is a complicated process. So just outline for us, what is probate? Give us a definition of what it means when a property is in probate.
So basically, probate is when the court is supervising the process of transferring legal title to a decedent's property, and they're transferring it to an entity that can then distribute it, or from that point, it can then be distributed to the heirs or beneficiaries. So probate has a lot of very key terms. People use them interchangeably, but they're very specific. So decedent simply means the person that passed away, the person that died. And then if you have a testamentary plan, so you have a trust, for example, then, or you have a will, you have beneficiaries. The difference is with a trust, you don't have to go to probate court necessarily. There are some exceptions, but with a will, you do still have to go to probate court. And if you die without a testamentary plan, you definitely have to go to probate court. Right. If you have a will, then you have beneficiaries. If you have a trust, you have beneficiaries, but we're talking about probate. So if you have a will, you have beneficiaries. if you die with nothing, no testamentary plan, nothing is written, or something is written that can't be validated. So, you know, somebody shows up with a will and everybody's like, that's not grandma's signature. That can't be validated. So
Right.
then you essentially have no plan. Then you have heirs at law. So heirs, no testamentary plan, beneficiaries, testamentary plan, will, trust, and then decedent simply means the person that passed away.
Got it. Got it. So, what are some of the requirements then, as we get into, not going into too much detail, but let's talk a little bit about what are some recommendations that you would say to avoid going into probate as a, and you know, not only obviously you're going to speak about it as a real estate agent, but also as an attorney, you know, some of those different things that that you would recommend.
So I'll touch on it a little bit briefly here. We're going to have it, you know, more in
Right.
detail in another video. We may even do a live where people can ask questions
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Mm-hmm.
You need a full estate plan. A full estate
Mm-hmm.
plan includes a trust. It includes a power of attorney, because if you get knocked on the head over the head, or you get incapacitated in some way, you're not dead, but you're not
Right.
able to handle your affairs. You need someone that's able to step in. Say you're a landlord and you have an apartment
Mm-hmm.
building, you have 10 units. Who's going to collect
Mm-hmm.
the rent? Who's going to
Mm-hmm.
pay the bills? Who's going to pay the property taxes? Or even if it's your own house, you know, who's going to write
Right.
the checks to pay the mortgage? Who's going to pay the insurance? That power of attorney works. It's a stopgap until you're able to, you know, then
Mm-hmm.
become yourself again, heal, and be able to take over your affairs again. And then you have a forget what they call it because I can't think of it right now, where you're able to manage somebody, a healthcare directive. There it is.
There you go. Right. A health
You
power of attorney.
have to
Mm-hmm.
have a healthcare directive, because again, if you're incapacitated and somebody needs to make those decisions for you, that may not necessarily be the person that handles the power of attorney. You may have someone that's very good with finances, but is not as familiar with your personal, you know, desires with regard to handling your health. And so that may be a different person. It can all be the
Right.
same person, but it may, you know, two people may be, it may be very different. You also need to have a pour over will. So just in case you know, buy all this property and you're selling property, and, you know, you don't update your trust, and you buy a piece of property and then something happens to you and you pass away before you can put it into your trust. This pour
Mhm.
over will is basically pouring the
Yeah.
contents that didn't make it into the trust into the trust. So you
Got
need a
it.
full estate plan, and you need to look at it very frequently. You need to look at this
Yeah.
trust. You don't, people get a trust and they get it and they're like, oh, I have a trust. And then I ask them, well, when's the last time you looked at the trust?
Right.
Trust. Oh, I got it 20 years ago. Okay, so you mean 3 houses
Yeah.
ago, no grandchildren, and you're missing a child.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Because you are now
To say
people that
the least.
want to be in the trust, and the trust doesn't have any of the property that
Right.
you wanted to distribute. So get a
Right.
full estate plan. Use an attorney. I was in a massive trust litigation. Lady had a trust, but it was done through just a trust company, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
specific enough. And
Oh.
there was a lot of fighting, 6 years of litigation,
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
attorneys. Yeah, so make sure you have it done. I recommend having it done with an
Mm-hmm.
attorney. I also recommend that you look at it at least every 3 years. It would be good if you
Mm-hmm.
looked at it every year, but at least every 3 years, because things
Right.
happen. Your trustee may pass away.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem. Or your trustee may be incapacitated. They
Yeah.
may have Alzheimer's. That's a
Right.
problem. Who's
Right.
going to handle your
Right.
affairs when you pass away if you've named someone who can't do it, or it can't is
Right.
with us? So, and then the third thing I would recommend, and this is this, you know, people don't necessarily do this because people don't like to talk about death. Talk to your family about your trust and your estate plan and your wishes.
Yeah.
No, I picked this person for this reason.
Yeah.
I would like for you to, it's a thankless job. I'd like for you to comply with my requests, and that my requests include, this is the person that I'd like to handle
Right.
these affairs. And that way you're not picking a fight with that person. That person didn't ask for the job. It's not a job that
Yeah.
you will really, really want.
Right.
You don't want to
Right.
handle the marshaling of all their assets and the paying of all that. You don't want to handle. That's not something you want to do. Go out and say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let me administer your estate. It's really a thankless job. And it can
Mm-hmm.
be even more challenging if people are fighting the person that's doing it. So please talk to the people that,
Absolutely.
please talk to your family and let them know
Yeah.
these are my wishes. But people don't
Right.
like to talk about death. So
No. Well, I think that you bring up a really good point about the health power of attorney or the health directive, because often, particularly, if we look at it in more of a traditional sense, it's an older person, they're passing down assets to their heirs, right? If they become later in age, and also to your point, if you haven't looked at your trust in years, let's say it's been 10, 12 years, well, you could have gone from 40, 45 to 55, and now you start getting in that age range where those health ailments become more prevalent, right?
mhm.
um, and you then don't have somebody that you've named for that healthcare directive, and then something happens to you, and you're not, because we always think, well, I'll change it if I get sick, I'll change it when that time comes, or when I get 60, that's a good time for me to change my healthcare directive. We hear countless stories, unfortunately, of people in their 50s, who have strokes, who have um, uh, um, heart attacks, and they become incapacitated, and they're no longer in a frame of mind, or early Alzheimer's, and so then that starts to question their ability to be able to act on their own. So I say all of that to say that you bring up a really good point about the healthcare directive, because you don't ever want to be caught off guard. You want to be in a position that you have somebody named to
Yep.
be able to make those types of decisions for you if you find yourself in that position.
Yep. And
Um,
people don't need to wait until they're 65. Chadwick Boseman
right.
was my age.
Oh my God. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
think you have
Right.
time. You can get knocked over the head. You can get diagnosed with an illness. You can get coronavirus. You can get
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And and particularly if you have little ones,
Right.
or if you have a person in your family that's not necessarily a minor, but that you're caring for, you're
Right.
providing care for.
Right.
If you haven't said anything, imagine if you have a house that they're living in that you really want them to
You
stay
are
in,
reading my mind. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
when you pass away, somebody else is like, well, we want a payout. And they're evicting everybody and selling the house
Yeah.
out from under the person that really actually you intended to care for.
Yeah.
You have to make these decisions yourself. You have to write
Yeah.
stuff down, and it has to be in a way that can be enforced by the court. And then you have to make sure that it works for your family.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the asset requirements, because I know that that's come up in conversation, that there is an asset requirement in terms of, at what amount, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but what triggers the requirement to have to go into probate. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So if you have $166,250, not a
I
nice
love
round
that you
number.
have that number memorized.
This is what I do. I need to have this number memorized. This is my niche.
Right, right.
It was just raised. It was like a nice round number, $150,000, until January, and then they changed it.
Yeah.
If you have $166,250 in assets that are subject to the probate court, that's when you file the petition for probate. Anything
Okay.
less than that, you can file a small estates
Mm.
declaration. That's a different process.
Mhm.
So when I say subject to the probate court, if you have $1 million in
Mhm.
assets, but it's in a trust, that's a valid trust,
Mhm.
no probate, the trustee handles it. if you have a bank account that has, you know, $800,000 in it, and you have designated a pay on death beneficiary. Some people have bank accounts with
Yeah.
no beneficiaries.
Right.
If you have designated a person and it's a pay on death account, no probate. That money can go however you designate it to go.
Hmm.
Insurance policies, IRAs, life insurance, all those things.
Hmm.
If you have a designated beneficiary, those are not subject to probate court without some other exceptions. And there's an exception to everything, but generally
Right.
those pass. If you are a joint tenant, if I
Hmm.
own property with my sister, my imaginary sister, because I'm an only child,
I was gonna say.
my sister that I wanted as a child and never got. So if you own property with your sibling
Uh-huh.
and joint tenant, it's a house, you own it, and you pass away and you have right of survivorship, that goes straight to your sister and no probate court.
Okay.
But what typically happens is somebody owns some real property, a
Hmm.
house, an apartment building, a commercial building, some sort of real estate in California. And we all know the value of prices of things in California.
Right.
It's usually, I haven't seen anything yet. Now I
Yeah.
might see something in my life, unless it's like a trailer or something like
Yeah.
where you're selling it for like just land value. Most property, real property, is going to meet that threshold.
Uh-huh.
And if it's not designated in a trust, it's going to trigger probate court.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Um, so this is all incredibly helpful. I think we've done a really good job of doing an overview. I want to just go into a little bit about you as a real estate agent and your your uniqueness, your background, and your ability to be an expert in this. And then also, I don't know how widely known or little known fact this is, but you also have, is it a psychology background?
I have
Um,
2 degrees in psychology. And
yeah.
school, apparently.
So, I mean, I know that we talk about how when we're in this business, in the business of selling real estate and mortgages, there's such it's such an emotional transaction, and we often are wearing two hats in this.
Yep.
Probate is even more so
Yep.
because you're dealing with so many emotional tugs on multiple levels. You're dealing with the passing of this individual, regardless of how expected, or unfortunately, if it's unexpected, it may be. Now you have to go through, as you mentioned earlier, nobody really wants this job. They might think that they want this job, but once they get into it, they really don't want this job in terms of, being the executor of that estate and having to divvy up those assets and comb through what the decedent's wishes were. But you bring to the table a unique background in understanding how to manage that emotion. So just kind of speak to that a little bit.
So you're only coming to probate court because somebody died. So
Yeah.
let's just start there. And it's generally somebody that you cared about or had some emotion about.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully the emotion was positive. In a lot of instances, unfortunately, the emotion is not. It's negative for whatever reason, or it can bring about some negativity. So, mom dies. Siblings that have been estranged for years are now forced to come together to deal with this. It's not just the transaction of selling the property, because that can just be in a fight in of itself. Who's
Right.
going to get control to do this? And then once that's figured out, then there's stuff in the house that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be taken care of, or there's other assets that aren't real property that need to be distributed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have all of this layer of things that people may not like each other. They may be estranged, or even more common is Mr. and Mrs. Jones had a lovely marriage and they had 3 lovely children. And then Mrs. Jones passes away.
Mm-hmm.
They've been married for 25 years. Mrs. Jones passed away. They've paid off their house that was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Jones. It's now Mr. Jones's sole property. Mr. Jones then marries Sally Jones, Mrs. Jones number 2.
Right.
Mrs. Jones number 2 has her own children and does not necessarily have a good relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Jones number 1's children. When Mr. Jones then passes away, the house is his sole property because it was paid off. There was no mortgages. It didn't get transmuted, which is a nice legal term, turned into community property. It's his sole property. But the children the daughter, that comes to you and says, or comes to me and says, okay, Erica, my dad has passed away. I want to sell the house. My question is not, okay, let's see how much it's worth. And my question is, do you have authority to sell this property? And in this situation, generally, she doesn't.
Yeah.
The probate code is very specific about priority of appointment, who gets to petition the court for probate. And when you're petitioning the court under a will, you're petitioning to execute the will or be executor. So you're honoring the will, what the will says. If the person in this scenario that I gave you, Mr. Jones, has no estate plan, no testamentary plan, no anything, you're petitioning the court to administer the estate. So in this situation, Mr. Jones has left no direction for how he wants anything to go. He's married to Mrs. Jones number 2. His daughter wants to sell the property or take over the property because that's their family home. Mrs. Jones number 2 wants to sell the property and has her daughter as the realtor, and that's what she wants to do. The probate code is very clear about who gets priority. In this situation, the surviving spouse is almost always the trump card. It goes surviving spouse, then children, then grandchildren, like there's a whole list. Yeah. And so if Mrs. Jones number 2 wants to probate the estate and there's nothing wrong with her doing it, meaning she hasn't, defrauded anybody, she hasn't done anything criminal, there's no reason for the court not to appoint her, Mrs. Jones number 2 is likely going to be the person that, that handles the affairs and administers the estate in this situation. And so you have all of those emotions, because now this lady, it's usually this lady or this man, there's not really very nice terms that are spoken about the other person, now has control over how things go. And even if you don't have that scenario, there may be things in the house that are personal to you that may not be personal to anybody else. So if the administrator is not someone who is loving in those items, like, okay, get all this crap out of here, let's sell the house, that may cause some problems. But generally a probate transaction has a lot of emotion to it because it's not necessarily the real property, as I said before, it's the stuff. You have to go through the stuff. Like when my father passed away and I'm an only child, there was nobody to fight with. My mother said, you handle it. When we went to the funeral home for our appointment to make arrangements, I had to go through the drawer to find his military release form so that he could get his, military burial. And I do this for a living. I'm an attorney. I handle probates in court. I handle probate real estate. I have 2 degrees in psychology. It took every ounce of my being to be able to walk over to the file cabinet and pull open the drawer, take out his discharge papers. And I closed that drawer and I didn't look back for months. I didn't even go over there. So there'll be parts of the process where people just kind of have a breakdown. They'll, my mother died or my father died or my sibling died, or this is, really hard for me and I don't know how to do this. And we have to take a pause, and I will hold your hand. It's Corona, so I will hold your hand figuratively, not literally. So touching. I will be there with you, and I will listen to you, and I will still help you.
Right.
Like, we still need to get through this process. I understand that it's emotional. I understand that it's challenging. I understand that nobody wants to deal with this, which is all the more reason why you should have an estate plan so you can tell people what to do so they're not really kind of guessing. But yes, it gets emotional at different stages. Like, okay, so what do I do with this, or how do I deal with this, or my sibling wants this, or my brother really wants his trophies, but we can't find them in the house. All of those types of things, and then
Mhm.
even down to me coming to help you kind of figure out what needs to come out of the property so that we can actually sell it. Because my parents had tax returns from the 60s. Like, who does
I'm actually getting ready to get rid of some time. They beat me. I have mine. I think mine about 10, 15 years old. Yeah, I was just telling my husband about that. Yeah.
No, nobody wants those, lady. No, nobody wants those.
Right.
So
Right.
getting through and moving things out of the house, saying, okay, well, this can stay, this can
Right.
go, because some people are
Right.
just paralyzed by that. Like, there's so much
Right.
in wrapping up or somebody else's life and then the stuff is what gets you emotional, because you may open a closet and pick out a shirt that has your father's, cologne, or your
Sense.
mother's
Right.
perfume. And so senses do a lot of things to
Yeah.
us. And so my goal
Yeah.
is to get you through the process quickly and efficiently, but with
Mhm.
feeling and
Mhm.
understand that it's not just a transaction for you. This is something that you actually care about, and it is meaningful to you. And consequently, the families that I have, worked with I still feel tied to them. I check in on
Right.
them, I call them, make sure that they're doing okay, because it's not simply a transaction. I understand it from a variety of perspectives, and I'm not going to
Mhm.
this is not just a dollar making activity for me. This is, again, my passion project. So.
Right, right. No, understood. And I mean, this is the second time that you brought that up. And I think it's a really important point that people have that conversation with their families to voice their intentions. That was my experience with my family. My grandfather was the patriarch of the family. He had several properties. And when he passed away, there had been no previous conversation. It created that still lasts today. I mean, he passed away some 20 years ago now, I think it is, more than that, 23 years ago. And it still, still has a reverberating effect through our family. It was a breaking point, and it was simply because he had a problem facing his own death. He had a problem. He had a problem with age and death for years. It wasn't something that was like when the moment came, he just, saw, white noise and freaked out or anything like that. But it was just more so that he had always had a challenge with that. And so when the time came, when he became ill, he had a stroke. So he at least had that period of time of where he was able to even though he didn't have a medical power of attorney, he was still in his right mind, if you will, enough. He had enough of his capabilities to be able to voice, or it was time to gather the family around the bed and say, hey, this is my intention. This is who I've put in place. This is how I would like the property to be divvied up. And then also too, giving your Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and then, Mrs. Jones the second, that is a common situation where one spouse passes away, and then, the surviving spouse marries somebody else, and that other person becomes that woman or that man. I have one, I've got that woman as well. And if your parent has not outlined anything and made clear to whomever, it's really unfair to the original family, to those kids,
Mhm,
to the daughter,
mhm.
or to those three kids in your scenario. Because as you mentioned, they're the ones that grew up in the house. They're the ones that have more of the sentimental value in the home. And it really does make for a very tense and difficult situation. So wrapping this up, the purpose of us putting this together is really, as you mentioned in your last comment, it isn't just about this is a transactional opportunity for us. It really is, what can we do to help educate people, to help them avoid these situations? What are some of the tools that they can put in place? because unfortunately this has come about. You know, it's like when you see that sign, no shoes, no shirt, no service, is because somebody has tried to go in the store shirtless and shoeless.
Yep.
So it is about, these are situations, these are nightmares, these are horror stories that we have come across or that we've experienced in our own lives, our own situations, that we're able to then pass on and say, don't do what I did, or, you know, don't have the same experience that my other clients had. Let me give you some pointers, some, you know, some easy tips, or they may not be easy. You know, these are going to be difficult conversations for people to have, but it really is important to have that difficult situation in order to avoid a lot of financial hardship later on. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
The
So,
fighting, then you delay, and then the attorneys, rack up bills. I mean, bills are probate attorneys get paid a percentage of the estate, and you know,
right.
so
And
they're
they're
going to get
billable
paid.
hours.
Yeah, they're going to get paid whether or not, whenever this is
Right,
resolved. You're not going to cut
right,
the transactions.
right, right. Absolutely. And I think that if there's one takeaway from this that we can try and pass on to those individuals that are holding those estates, is to say the last thing that you want to do is to have, you know, worked your whole life to accumulate this level of wealth. You know, whatever it is, it's more than $166 and 200 or 166,250, whatever
Yep.
that number is, right? And so you have worked towards acquiring that much wealth. You want to be able to pass on as much of that to your heirs as possible.
Yep.
Rather it be your kids, your grandchildren, you know, paying for people's college, whatever it is, donating it to, you know, whatever, you know, hairless cat society. You
And it
want
may
to
not,
make
and you may
sure
not want it to go to certain people. And so that's the other
that's,
thing.
yeah,
You may not want your daughter to benefit from the estate. It may not be that you have a bad relationship with the daughter. The daughter may have the wealth of Jeff Bezos. And so that daughter
right,
doesn't need any money, but you may
right,
want to provide for the other two children. And so
right,
you say that.
right,
You need to specify, I don't want to, I disinherit so-and-so, because if you just leave it to heirs at law, it's heirs at law. So everybody that is a
mm-hmm,
potential heir at law, and you didn't want your sister to get anything, or anybody else. You wanted two people to benefit from your assets, and you didn't say that. So you don't have
right.
beneficiaries. You have all these heirs, and that's not what you wanted.
You know, it comes to mind, it's really funny, is I think, you know, we couldn't read that person's mind when they were alive. How are we going to read their mind when they've passed away?
Right, right. Mama loved me, and she wanted me to have. No, she didn't. You just made that up, and we have no evidence to the contrary. So write it down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So great. Well, thank you to everyone who joined, who you know, tuned in to watch this video. There is more to come. As I said, this is an introductory to a full series on probates. How to avoid them, how to set them up, who to call. So our contact information is to follow in this video. Please let us know if you want to reach out to us. Definitely don't hesitate. We are here as informative resources for you. So, you know, as the Zen lender, we're here to keep you calm. All right, well, have a good one. Thanks so much, Erica.
Thank you.